December the 8th, 1972, United Airlines Flight 553 takes off from Washington, D.C. towards Chicago. A warning light flares.
Recorder go off.
The captain snaps. Descending into Midway, air traffic yells.
Slow down.
Alarms scream as the crew scrambles. The plane dives. Too fast. Too low. Freezing wind batters the hull. Rooftops claw upwards. 55 passengers brace in the cabin, unaware, their lives hanging in the chaos. Can the pilots seize control from disaster, or will this flight crash into tragedy? This is the terrifying story of United Airlines Flight 553. The flight was a regularly scheduled service from Washington National Airport to Chicago's Midway International Airport and departed on December the 8th, 1972, with only 55 passengers and 6 crew members aboard. The Boeing 737-200, piloted by Captain Wendell Lewis Whitehouse, a highly experienced pilot with approximately 18,000 flight hours to his credit, had been with the airline since 1956 and had logged more than 2,400 flight hours on the Boeing 737 cockpit. First Officer Coble had more than 10,600 flight hours, including nearly 1,700 hours on the Boeing 737 under his belt, and Second Officer Elder had close to 2,700 hours, with nearly 1,200 of them on the Boeing 737. The plane had a capacity of over 100 passengers, but was only half full. While flights from Washington National often carried politically connected individuals, particularly to destinations like Chicago, Flight 553 had an unusually high number of such passengers. These included Congressman George Collins of Chicago and several people linked to the Watergate scandal. Dorothy Hunt, wife of one of the organizers, boarded Flight 553 with $10,000, as did CBS reporter Michelle Clark, who was investigating Watergate. Flight 553 took off from Washington, D.C. at 1:50 p.m. local time, setting course for Chicago while climbing to a cruising altitude of 28,000 feet. For approximately an hour and a half, the flight progressed routinely. However, the tranquility was broken when a warning light illuminated on the instrument panel, indicating a failure in the flight data recorder.
Recorder go off?
Captain Whitehouse asked, his voice laced with concern.
Yeah.
Confirmed Second Officer Elder.
See what's wrong with it, will ya?
Whitehouse ordered, directing Elder to investigate the malfunction. At this point, Flight 553 was already on its approach to Chicago Midway International Airport and had received clearance to descend to 4,000 feet. They were positioned as the second aircraft in the landing sequence, following a slower, light twin turboprop Aero Commander. To ensure adequate separation between the two aircraft, Air Traffic Control instructed Flight 553 to reduce their speed to 180 knots, 333 kilometers per hour. Shortly after, another request came to further decrease their speed to 160 knots. The pilots complied by deploying flaps to increase aerodynamic drag and by reducing engine power. Subsequently, Air Traffic Control cleared Flight 553 for further descent to 2,000 feet. First Officer Coble acknowledged the instruction, radioing,
"Down to 2,000, 553 leaving 4.
However, Captain Whitehouse had not yet initiated the descent. He and Second Officer Elder were still engaged in troubleshooting the issue with the malfunctioning flight data recorder.
Christ, I can't even find the circuit breaker for this.
Elder exclaimed in frustration. After finally locating the breaker, he reported,
Don't know what to say. I get a reaction when I pull the AC. No reaction when you pull the DC, though.
Observed Coble, highlighting the lack of response to the DC power supply.
Want me to call maintenance?
Elder asked, seeking guidance on the next course of action.
Call it in.
Whitehouse instructed, authorizing Elder to contact maintenance. Having maintained their altitude at 4,000 feet for 35 seconds beyond the point of descent clearance, Captain Whitehouse finally commenced the descent towards 2,000 feet. Despite his focus on the malfunctioning recorder, Captain Whitehouse appeared to be losing situational awareness regarding their flight plan. Unbeknownst to him, Flight 553 was rapidly approaching the outer marker. This navigational point signaled the commencement of the final approach phase, where the ideal altitude for crossing was 1,500 feet. However, Whitehouse had selected a descent rate of just 750 feet per minute, a rate that would prove insufficient to reach the target altitude by the time they reached the outer marker. As the descent progressed, the crew further extended the flaps to 30 degrees. This action, while intended to increase lift, inadvertently caused the aircraft to momentarily level off its descent. Compounding the issue, the engine power setting was too low to sustain level flight at this configuration and airspeed. Consequently, the aircraft's speed bled off, dropping from 150 knots to 130 knots before Captain Whitehouse reinitiated the descent. Just before 2:26 p.m., Flight 553 flew over the outer marker at an altitude of 2,200 feet, a significant 700 feet above the recommended height. Realizing their excessive altitude, Captain Whitehouse urgently reconfigured the aircraft to achieve a much steeper descent rate of 1,550 feet per minute. This was considerably more aggressive than the recommended rate for a stabilized final approach. To achieve this rapid descent, he deployed the speed brakes, spoilers that extend from the wings to increase drag and reduce airspeed. The use of speed brakes within the outer marker was highly unusual and served as a clear indication that the approach was not properly stabilized. Indeed, altitude was not the only aspect where the crew seemed to be playing catch-up with the aircraft. It was only at this late stage, after crossing the outer marker, that Captain Whitehouse called for the final descent checklist. This crucial checklist was meant to be completed before reaching the outer marker, highlighting a significant procedural lapse. Rushing against time, Whitehouse and Coble hurried to complete the final descent checklist. In their haste, crucial tasks, such as meticulously monitoring airspeed, were overlooked. The checklist items were rattled off in rapid succession.
Flight and nav, cross-checked. Landing gear, down 3 green. Speed brake, armed.
Coble replied, his attention flitting briefly to the speed brake indicator light. However, Coble's brief glance proved insufficient. In reality, the speed brakes were not merely armed, they were fully deployed. The indicator light, unfortunately, remained illuminated, with the label "Speed Brakes Armed," regardless of whether they were actually armed or fully engaged. Coble, it seemed, had failed to verify the actual position of the speed brake lever itself. Just as they completed the final descent checklist, Captain Whitehouse finally caught sight of the ground through a break in the clouds. He realized, with a jolt, that they were rapidly approaching the minimum descent altitude, MDA, of 1,000 feet. Below this altitude, further descent was prohibited without established visual contact with the runway. Whitehouse abruptly leveled the aircraft at 1,000 feet. In this sudden maneuver, however, he crucially forgot to retract the speed brakes. With the drag-inducing speed brakes still extended while now in level flight, the aircraft began to decelerate with alarming speed. Critically, they were already flying at an airspeed of less than 130 knots, leaving little margin for further speed loss. Simultaneously, in air traffic control, the controller's anxiety about the decreasing separation between Flight 553 and the aero commander ahead intensified. He grew increasingly concerned that the slower aero commander would not have sufficient time to clear the runway before the approaching 737. He considered instructing the aero commander to divert to the parallel runway, 31R, but realized it was already too late for the smaller aircraft to safely alter its course. Instead, he urgently radioed Flight 553 with new instructions. United 553, execute a missed approach. Make a left turn to a heading of 180. Climb to 2000. Precisely at that instant, a cascade of critical events unfolded within the cockpit of Flight 553. Just as the controller's voice began transmitting the missed approach command, Captain Whitehouse, acutely aware of their rapidly diminishing airspeed, reacted by increasing engine power from 59% to 75%. Almost simultaneously, as the controller uttered the crucial word execute, the airspeed plummeted to a dangerously low level, triggering the stick shaker. This system, designed to prevent stalls, violently vibrated the pilot's control columns, delivering a stark physical warning of an impending aerodynamic stall. Overwhelmed by this sudden convergence of alarms and instructions, Whitehouse and Coble scrambled to respond. Whitehouse, still unaware that the speed brakes remained extended and were contributing to the excessive drag, mistakenly concluded that the aircraft's flap configuration was the culprit. In a misguided attempt to regain airspeed, he retracted the flaps from 30 degrees to 15 degrees. This action, tragically, had the exact opposite of the intended effect. By reducing the wing's lift-generating capacity, he inadvertently worsened the situation and brought the aircraft closer to a stall. In the midst of the unfolding emergency, Coble acknowledged the controller's instruction.
Okay, left turn to 180. Left turn okay? Want more flaps?
Second Officer Elder interjected, sensing the critical need for lift.
Flaps 15.
Someone responded in the confusion, immediately followed by a voice of dawning realization.
I'm sorry.
At this point, Captain Whitehouse finally recognized his grave error. He frantically moved to correct it, re-extending the flaps to 40 degrees and simultaneously raising the landing gear in a desperate attempt to reduce drag. Neither the redeployed flaps, nor the retracted landing gear, nor the increased engine power could compensate for the massive drag still being generated by the extended speed brakes. Tragically, Flight 553 succumbed to an aerodynamic stall at a mere 400 feet above the ground, sealing its fate. Violent vibrations shuddered through Flight 553 as it pitched nose upward at a terrifying angle and began its uncontrolled fall from the sky. A wave of terrified cries erupted from the passenger cabin as the aircraft plummeted toward the densely populated houses below. In the cockpit, exclamations of shock and disbelief filled the air as the pilots wrestled with the unresponsive controls. At such a perilously low altitude, recovery was an impossible prospect. Although Captain Whitehouse finally identified the fatal mistake and retracted the speed brakes, the correction came tragically too late. A fraction of a second later, Flight 553 clipped the top of a tall tree and sheared through a detached garage before careening directly into a two-story house in Chicago's West Lawn neighborhood. The impact was cataclysmic. The house instantly erupted in a violent explosion of flying bricks and debris. The left wing of the 737 sliced cleanly through half the roof of an adjacent house. The stricken aircraft then careened across the street, slamming head-on into 3 more homes, reducing them to piles of rubble. The fuselage of Flight 553 fractured into 2 main sections, with the forward portion almost completely disintegrating upon impact. Simultaneously, a structural failure tore through the cockpit itself, instantly and fatally injuring the first officer. As the mangled wreckage ground to a halt, a raging fire erupted immediately amidst the debris. Spilled jet fuel ignited in a massive fireball, and within seconds, towering flames engulfed both sides of the shattered plane. Those who had miraculously survived the brutal crash now faced a desperate battle against the rapidly spreading inferno, trapped within the burning remains of Flight 553. While impact claimed most lives in the forward cabin, remarkably, the economy section held numerous survivors initially. However, black smoke and fire instantly surged into the cabin, turning the wreckage into a death trap. Escape became a desperate, chaotic scramble as smoke rapidly choked the air. Many succumbed to the toxic fumes, including all remaining first-class passengers, Captain Whitehouse, and others who couldn't escape the inferno in time. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button to support us.